The suspect, who Inspector Frederick Aberline believed was most likely to have been Jack the Ripper, was George Chapman, otherwise known as Severin Klosowski. Klosowski's story is a dark one of serial murder, and the Polish immigrant was hanged in 1903 at Wandsworth Prison. By the time of his death, he had poisoned 3 women he referred to as wives, including Bessie Taylor, his wife during his stint as landlord at a Hertfordshire pub called the Grapes. During the Ripper spree, Klosowski was working as an assistant barber in Whitechapel High Street. He married Lucy Badowski after the couple met at a Polish nightclub in Clerkenwell, only for another woman to arrive on the scene claiming to be Mrs. Klosowski. The awkward situation was resolved, and Klosowski and Lucy emigrated to the USA in 1891, just 2 years after the canonical Ripper murders. A year later, a restless Klosowski returned alone, leaving Lucy in America. He then met another woman with the same name as a Ripper victim, Annie Chapman. They lived together for about a year, and he adopted her surname, claiming to be an American called George Chapman. They lived seemingly happily for a while and moved to Hastings in Sussex, where Chapman became a barber and his wife played the piano for customers. But Annie's drinking got out of control, and the couple moved back to London, where Chapman had taken the licence of the Prince of Wales pub in Bartholomew Square off Old Street. Here, Mrs. Chapman fell sick and died at the end of 1895. In 1898, Chapman married Bessie Taylor, and they spent a year managing the Grapes in Bishop Stortford, Hertfordshire. Then in 1900, they began running another pub back in London, the Monument in Union Street, Borough. Bessie died in February 1901, and with Chapman's lease about to fall in, there was a fire at the pub. The insurance company believed it to be arson and did not pay up. Chapman then took the licence of another pub, the Crown, at 213 Borough High Street, London. He was soon hitched again, this time to a barmaid he had hired called Maud Marsh. Maud was dead within a year. This time the doctor smelled a rat after seeing 2 Mrs. Chapmans with similar symptoms in less than 2 years. All 3 of Chapman's spouses were exhumed, and their bodies were found to be in excellent state of preservation, a characteristic of antimony poisoning. Inspector Aberline is reported to have told arresting officer George Godley, "You've got Jack the Ripper at last." Chapman was hanged for all 3 murders in 1903. He was 37. But could the poisoner really have been Jack the Ripper? In another of our occasional discussions on the case, I asked MP Priestley, author of Jack the Ripper, One Autumn in Whitechapel, what he thought of Chapman's candidature. He said, "Chapman is one of the better Ripper suspects, in that he's about the right age-ish, spoke with a European accent, and was probably living nearby on Cable Street at the time of the 1888 murders, but that's pretty much it." Philip Sugden seems to have believed that he was probably the killer, largely for those reasons, and it's often mentioned that Fred Aberline, on hearing of his arrest, is supposed to have told the arresting officers that they got Jack the Ripper at last, but he had never heard of him before then, and nobody had ever considered him a suspect. Also, having travelled to the US, he was living in New Jersey when the murder of Francis Coles took place on the 13th of February 1891, which was attributed to Jack the Ripper, and his methods of carrying out the crimes seemed completely different to those of the Whitechapel Murderer. Concluding, he said, "Suggesting that George Chapman is Jack the Ripper is like suggesting that Peter Tobin was Bible John, in that there isn't really any evidence against him, other than the fact that he later turned out to also be a serial killer and was living roughly nearby at the time." You can find out more about George Chapman and his potential links to Jack the Ripper in my books The Inevitable Jack the Ripper and Jack the Ripper's County, which are both out now on Amazon. Links in the description. So what do you think? Could a serial killer known for poisoning have committed the far more grisly Ripper murders? Was George Chapman Jack the Ripper? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and most importantly subscribe. Thank you for watching.